Well, it's 3:05, so let's begin. Clerk, may we have roll call?
Yes. Syok,
Here.
Jones. Jones is absent. Abakoga. Abakoga is absent. Flagger.
Here.
Flagger is present. Constantine.
Present.
Constantine is present. Klein.
Here.
Klein is present with 4 members present. 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so the meeting will come to order at 3:06 p.m. And before we get started, I would like to remind everyone that the board and attendees of some procedural items for this meeting. I think it's a good habit for us to always remind ourselves that please remain muted when you're not speaking. If board members or attendees want to speak or have a question, use your raise hand feature. As speakers will be called upon to speak one at a time, and then we'll do a random order voice vote when it is time for us to vote for each item. Please note that this meeting is being conducted virtually via Zoom and YouTube in accordance with State of California Executive Order N2920. And members of the public wishing to give oral comments, I will definitely make sure that we provide that space and that time during each agenda item. Discussion and comment must be, let's see, and each speaker will be given 3 minutes to comment on each item. Okay, and so with that, we now move to our first item of business on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. It's before you. I have 3 things on there. And initially, let's see, do we have anyone in attendee before? I only see Ms. Way. Okay, so we do have 3 things on consent agenda. And so I'm going to ask if anyone would like to make a motion, and then we'll make a second, and then we can have discussion.
Move to approve consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on consent? So, seeing none, I'm going to go to our public and see if anyone in our public would like to. And I see no hands raised. I am closing public comment with no further debate. Clerk, could you please do the roll call? Call the roll, I'm sorry.
Yes. Syok.
Yes?
Flagger. Flagger. I
Yes.
wasn't able to hear you. Is that I?
Yes.
Okay. Flagger, I. Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine, I. And Klein.
Yes.
Klein, I. With 4 ayes, we have the motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will now move to item 3 in our agenda, which is our 2022 budget. And we're going to have a discussion and a recommendation to the board of directors for next week's meeting. And so I am going to turn to our treasurer and to our executive director for a report.
And do you want to take it?
Yep, I do.
Okay.
I am going to share a screen with you all in just a second when I get the right. I'm doing this a little different than I have in years past, partially because COVID. And after Nisa and I have talked about the budget, we've decided that we think it's probably a good idea if we just have that in asking you to make a decision or a recommendation today, that you give Nisa and I some policy direction is what we're asking. And then we will finalize the budget and bring it next week to the board of directors. I hope that sounds like a reasonable path forward. And of course, so.
And as you're pulling it up, Andy, I'll give some context too. As we were thinking about and talking about this year's budget, we realized there are definitely some unexpected costs and expenses that we're going to need to cover this coming year. And so, you know, we have the dues that each city pays, and we have our normal income or revenue source. And so with these additional costs and expenses, we want to have a policy discussion about how do we cover these unexpected costs and expenses for this year. And there are a couple options that Andy and I talked about, but obviously we wanted to make sure that we had you weigh in first before we moved forward.
Okay, so are you all, do you need that larger, or can you see that all well enough?
I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. So what you can't tell from, basically we are in it, I was surprised when I finished the numbers this morning, but because of COVID and because we haven't had some monthly expenses that we usually do because of not meeting in person, we do have a fairly similar, we're in a similar reserve situation that we have been in the past because we don't have hospitality charges. We do budget, we have budgeted the last 3 years to pay more expenditures in our general meeting in May and in December, so that if we chose to bring a policy component to the meeting or a speaker or something like that, that we did, since those are kind of, a big time where we try to bring all of our members in, we do have a cushion. So we don't have expenditures on those events. So that helps. I also had several places in the budget last year that we had put money in to help pay for the organizational status. And so as we go through this, you'll be able to see that we have, looks like we've spent a lot more money for consulting, and some of that is our organizational status, and some is, it really is about the organizational status piece of it. As we're moving forward. So here you can see.
Andy, you may need to expand your screen so they can see each line item. That first
right. I gotcha. Okay, here.
Yeah.
Are you guys seeing that if I move it over? Can you still see it or not?
We see nothing now.
Okay, hold on. Let me I need to move it. I have to reconfigure my screen so you can see it all. Okay, I'm going to.
Actually, I think now we can see it.
Now you okay? I had to reformat everything. Okay, so you can see. So the starting balance is here, so that's fairly good, and it's actually $30,000 more than kind of the reserve would be about 60 that we would try to be between 60 and 90. We had actually wanted to go below 60, but because of COVID, we ended up in a better position last year and this year. Restricted, I'm having a little bit of issue with QuickBooks, but the restricted was certain reserves, so I don't have that restricted number carried over. But basically what you can see is our dues. If we hold our dues flat at 150,000, and then interest from our LAIF investments, and then if we do have events next year, that you can see that our total revenues would be at this line right here, 162,000, 163,000. If you then include our reserves, and this is not I'm not including the planning collaborative here, and I'm not including the roundtable. This is just the cities association. Then our total resources would be 254,000. Our general expenses last year, we had a much lower. We had a lower number, but then we added in. We had an additional budget options for you to choose, and those options included allowing us to have a part-time admin, and then we had extra expenditures, including one-time purchases for equipment, for a printer, a computer, a phone, and then also in our office expenses. Well, the one-time expenses are right here. And then we added in some, we expanded our office expenses to include the additional software fees as well, because you have Office and Zoom. Well, Zoom we had to add, and so those expenses there. On this budget, I was really surprised that it wasn't over. But that's where I anticipate that we'll land. We also had priorities for the board, and that was $5,000. And the priorities I'm also using for, I've also considered using that for our organizational status and for attorney expenses. And then you can see attorney here. Our proposed budget was $18,000 here. And the estimate, the estimate at this time is 20,000, but I actually have no idea really where we're going to come out there with everything that we have going on. The accountant bookkeeper, this number was rolled in last year with our just in a budget line item for consultant and legal. So our accountant bookkeeper, what I have, I mean, we typically spend about we spent, I believe, about $6,000 with the accountant working with the attorney on our org status, and then we also have approximately between $400 and $500 monthly with bookkeeping fees, and our bookkeepers' rates have gone up as well. This is our salary line where I believe that we're going to stay, and you can see that I haven't filled those in yet for next year. And then we have payroll expenses, which are generally about 10%. And then we have our consultant legal, and we had 5,000 in here as well last year. In our event expenses, we only spent $2,300 this year. So, but I will, I have put those in for next year in this line. Oh, sorry, the colors are wrong. To be back to what we had budgeted the year before. So I guess the questions I have for you is, I don't know what to budget for legal, considering what we have going on. And I also want to know, in terms of what you want for the organization in time, if you're okay with us bumping up the admin a little bit. I left those open because I really think that's a policy decision. If you like the direction this is going, with more help, then I think that we can flush those numbers in. And things changed a little bit between when Nisa and I spoke yesterday. We are better off than I thought we were after I finally put everything into one spreadsheet. But also, I mean, I think there are long-term things that we need to talk about as well. I really think a different sort of software that's more, the QuickBooks is actually kind of difficult to take for our purposes of being a government or an association. Our auditors had problems with it. It's actually really difficult because this is the same software we've been using for 30 years. And because they didn't start with having different categories, we call them classes here. And because we have different classes now, it kind of throws off some of the bookkeeping. Anyway, Marika and I did talk. I asked her how her nonprofit, who does their bookkeeping, because we do have some issues because this is really meant for business. And so it's hard to pull over the unrestricted dollars and the dollars not spent the year before. So anyway, it's not perfect.
Andy, I'll just add to what Andy has said. So with regards to the policy questions for us to discuss at the meeting, I mean, first off, she showed you what our reserves amount is. And so one of the policy discussion, do we want to keep having a strong reserve moving forward? That 90,000, do we want to keep it there and not touch it? Which really means we have about 160,000 in resources to spread out over all these different expenses. The two things that Andy mentioned, the admin, I mean, Auden has been, I can just speak for myself, I think she's been a great addition to the team. And so that's one area Andy and I talked about saying, but that would actually need to be an increase. So whereas we're trying to figure out for this year where we can possibly cut or hold, that's one area where Andy and I supported, has identified that maybe we actually need to bump up on the software. That's also another decision we want to make if we want to put a certain, and I don't know what the amount is there. But Andy, I actually think looking at that spreadsheet is going to be helpful, because as we go through each line item, the question for us is, should we reduce it, stay the same? And if, for example, we decide to stay the same for all the expenses, we all know for legal at least is going to go up this year. Are there other sources of income? One of the things Andy and I talked about was the American Rescue Plan. Can we ask each city to somehow, contribute part of whatever millions they got to Cities Association, since the Cities Association is an extension of us? Do we try to cut back on some of the expenses we normally have every year? So that's the kind of discussion we want to have, and bear in mind what our resource of 100, assuming. So the first question is the reserves. Do we want to keep it strong? And then also just go through the different line items that Andy has. So Andy, you want to go through the different expense line items, and we can discuss, does it stay the same? Can it go down this year? Does it need to go up this year? And then we can circle back with the reserves.
Be helpful. And then if I could just note for the record with our clerk that Councilmember Abikoga has entered the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think there's really, I'm just going to go under the assumption, because I've heard our cities say loud and clear, there's a lot of them, some of our cities are having budget issues. And so I think the first question is, are we okay with keeping dues flat?
Is this the right year to ask our cities to increase dues? And Andy and I, our inclination is no, but it's a board decision.
Yeah, and I appreciate Nisa, the guidance. I would like just to make sure that we record these with motions. So if it's okay with each one as we go through it, we'll just record. So with regard to dues, would you like to make that motion?
Any discussion about, remember we had a long discussion last year about dues. So I'm ready to move that we do not increase the city dues this coming year.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Nisa, seconded by Rich, that we will not raise dues. Is there any debate from the board on this? And then I'm going to.
How are we going to do public comment, Chair?
Yes. And actually, you know what I'd like to do for our I see Larry, and hold on, for those in attendance in our public, what I'd like to do now that we've discussed how we're going to discuss the budget, if anyone would like to discuss the budget instead of line item, I'll look for hands up from our public. Okay, I see no hands up from our public. So I will close public comment and I bring it back to, let's see, Rich.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point that, and Andy mentioned it, that cities are going to be going through some tough times, and we're just trying to figure out where we are going to come out on this other end of the COVID tsunami. And we were in Morgan Hill, we were already looking at a $17 million deficit. So I think it might fall on deaf ears to ask cities to contribute more, even with any kind of money that they get from the federal government, because we're going to have to be using that money to fill the hole from COVID.
Thank you. And I definitely agree with that sentiment. Larry.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rich, and support this motion. I think that, we had this long discussion last year and maintained, I think, fairly flat for the majority of the cities. But I do think that looking at where we stand from a fiscal standpoint and, not really sure how well federal dollars will come through, but so many more, with the revenue loss as well as additional requirements based upon what recovery from COVID that we've had to do in response to COVID from different cities, I think it's only fair that we keep things flat as far as this year is concerned.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Okay, with no further debate. And here comes, for the record, let's indicate that Vice Mayor Jones has entered the meeting at 3:25.
Well, my ears were burning, so I thought I'd join you.
So
Sorry, I apologize for being late. I had another meeting that ran way over. But
no worries.
Congratulations, you are now the legislator chair. Good, everybody.
I'm now logging off of the Zoom meeting.
So just Vice Mayor Jones, just to catch you up, we are on item number 3, which is our budget. And there is a motion on the table. And for that is, we're looking at the budget line by line. With regard to revenue, there's a motion to keep revenue dues as is with no further request from cities. A motion and a second, and I'm going to ask clerk to call the roll.
Okay, we'll start with Abekoga.
Aye.
Abekoga, aye. Constantine. Constantine, aye. Klein.
Aye.
Klein, aye. Sayok.
Aye.
Sayok, aye. Flagger.
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, aye. And with 6 aye votes and 0 nay votes, the motion carries.
Okay, so should we continue down now towards expenses, the harder part? So
Yes. Okay, so let me share again. Office expenses, right here. This includes insurance, printing, meeting supplies, office supplies, website update. Our yearly website is about $600 a year. Insurance has gone up. Our payroll has gone up. Everything has gone up. Our PO box. I do anticipate that it will be more expensive to have a meeting in the next, when we go back to hybrid. Cities have been talking about this. We're going to likely have to accommodate having an online meeting. And previously, we did not stream meetings when we were in Sunnyvale or when we had executive meetings, but we likely may be required to do that, or to at least offer access via Zoom to the public. That's what the bills are stating right now. And so I just want to mention that. So it's, we have Zoom fees, we have Zoom webinar. We have to pay for expanded Zoom services to have webinars and to be able to stream. And so that won't be able to go away.
And I want to I defer to Andy on her recommended amount of $13,000 for this year, because I know she looked into the different potential expenses.
Yeah, and I'm going to look to both Andy and Nisa, because we know we have a pie, and we're going to be looking at having to carve that pie. I'm now rethinking the process. Maybe we should look at it holistically and then make a motion at the end, because things may change as we decide on priorities. Okay. So I see nodding heads, so I'm going to ask both of you to keep going.
Okay. One-time equipment. It's always a good idea to have something in one-time equipment. I don't think that at the moment, we don't need to buy a computer or anything. It is likely that we may need to buy an owl, or an owl is one of these devices that has cameras and sound on it for a conference room. I think that it would be wise for us to have our own. Sunnyvale, I've been in conversations with the city of Sunnyvale, and city of Sunnyvale is likely to buy an owl for their conference room, but we would need to ensure that when we have our meetings, that we'll have a way to accommodate the people in the room being seen and heard if we are Zooming to the public. So anyway, we might want to put in there 15,000 or 2,000. I think an owl is $1,100, but you need to buy cords, probably something to carry it in to ensure that it stays safe.
Andy, can we do the notes? So like in parentheticals, just do owl 1,200.
Yep. Can you see that?
And then Margaret, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking, just moving forward, maybe we should start like a reserve fund for, equipment, new equipment, replacement of equipment, software upgrades, just because I think this is becoming yearly. And if we can just put a little bit aside each year so we have something when we need to make a purchase, that might be a just easier way to go. So it's not like a big hit at once.
Yeah, and I think that previously we did have a line item that had a reserve for equipment. Previously, the auditors made us depreciate computers, and I don't think your cities depreciate computers anymore because they've become they're not as expensive as they used to be. And I don't know, maybe Laurel, you can tell me if that's accurate or not, but it's probably not a bad idea to make sure that we earmark our reserves, some of it for equipment and some of it for software, et cetera. But software is becoming also a service, what they call software as a service, where you buy a subscription primarily.
And Laurel, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Just to reiterate that it is very common for local jurisdictions to budget for those software subscriptions because they can get very costly, and then have some kind of equipment replacement schedule for your computers and other technology and devices. So it may not be an annual expense, but it is something that you should be planning for. And there's a number of different mechanisms. I think we're on a 5 to 8 year cycle, but I know other jurisdictions try and turn over their equipment a little bit faster. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Priorities for.
So if I take these notes, so what I'm looking for is so that I take your notes and your wants and needs, so that by next week I can turn this around into a document that reflects what you wanted. And so I don't believe we need to have an exact. Is that okay today, or how do you feel about that, Mariko and Nisa? Or do you want these? You want to have the numbers in here today?
No, because for example, I defer to Mariko on what she wants us to bring back, but I do think it's going to take some cleanup after this meeting for us to have something next week. Like I don't expect it to be final today.
Exactly. I think let's at the end of this discussion, I think let's vote on the principles of what we agreed to, and then have that budget with the detailed numbers come to the board.
Okay. So right now I have an equipment replacement schedule and a reserve, and we want that's for an equipment and software, correct?
Correct.
Margaret? Oh,
Just quick question. Can you help me understand when you say define the principles and not the dollars? What can you?
Well, do you want an exact budget by the time we leave here? Because typically what is required in our budget is that, or our bylaws, is that we present, the executive board does not have to approve the budget, the board does. I don't know what was previously done, but what I have done since I have been hired is that I always bring the budget to the executive board for your input. And I work with the treasurer to present an initial budget, and then we work with the executive board to make sure it reflects what the executive board has in mind.
Right.
And then we take it to the board. So,
so why the change in process this round?
this round, time.
Okay.
And also, and Chappie, you weren't here at the beginning. So what Andy brought to me yesterday was the realization that there will be unexpected costs and expenses this year, and we may need to reduce some of our line item expenses or find revenues from other sources to offset this unexpected cost or expense. And so the exercise we're doing right now is we know what our general reserves are, which is the 90,000. One potential source of increased revenue would have been the dues, and we just all voted that we're not going to increase the dues. And so the first step we're doing really is going through each expense and say, is it the same for this coming year? Does it need to go up, or do we not need that expense for this year? And see where we end up. And then we'll see what our revenue is compared to this year's expenses to see if there's a source that we need to go to make up the difference.
And if we say populated the expenses from last year into this current budget, would that tell us what our?
Yeah, I can do that, right? You want me to do that?
But we also have to decide, so the one-time equipment for new hire, do we really need that for this year? So that's part of the discussion.
Not if we're
That
talking
could be a
about
blank.
We can change that to future. Well, I mean,
I think that's a zero though, Andy. Unless a board member tells us that they can think of an equipment for this year.
No, the only thing that we do have to consider is we're going to need to buy some sort of device like an owl.
Right. So maybe put 1,200 there then.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to put a wrench in your
nope. Here,
your
I'll
process, but I just want to understand like what we're doing.
I think what we're going to see is, if I look ahead, we're going to have to, for example, the next line item's attorney. And I think we all know that that column is going to increase. So.
That's the big unknown.
And so where do we cut expenses, given that we all agreed that we do not want to ask cities for more money?
Well, I think what's going to happen is just going to come out of the reserve, and if you're okay with that, and I think that there is one other big policy question to ask, is this just the cities association responsible to pay for the expanded attorney fees? Are you going to ask the roundtable to pay for some of them?
Hey, Andy, can you put the cell for attorney's fees? Can you put that in red? So
Yeah,
it's a 20,000.
well, I mean, I don't have anything in here now.
Right. That's last year.
and if we identify any others that also we know are high potential for.
And then, but we also just we need we need to conclude our organizational status, and and we need to continue to do our business. So I know that I can say that the addition of the attorney has been tremendous for me, and so I want to ask you if you feel that that was a wise expansion of what we have done when we expanded our budget. For me, it was hugely impactful for my job to have Shantine and now to have Kat within the organization, so that I'm not flying out there by myself.
Well, to answer your question, Andy, I don't want any attorneys to hear me say this, but I think that was a great move to bring in legal counsel.
I think.
Are you saying attorneys are valuable?
You didn't. Nobody heard me say that.
Plug your ears, Nisa. Plug your ears.
Plug
and you
your
too,
ears.
Kat.
So when I looked at this, if we want to just talk generally,
back to some order.
I'm sorry.
We're on the attorney's line item, and Chappie, did you ask for that to be read so that we could come back to it, or do you want to actually, because that's next? Should we actually have that discussion now?
Yeah. So I wanted to be read, to highlight it, to know, visually that is gonna be an item that we're probably gonna increase, or there's a probability that we're gonna increase, and just make that prominent. And any other line items that we have like that too, I think we should highlight.
Okay. Nisa, does that work for you as treasurer?
It does.
Okay. I think that's a big area of discussion, and there's going to be several policy questions. So would it be wise if we went to the other, what we think easier question?
And part of it too is, so if you go back up to the bookkeeper, where is that one? So we have 13,000.
Oh, I don't have anything there yet. So hold on. Let me do a little quick. I think that is high because it included the accountant's fees in it as well. The accountant bookkeeper line is entangled into the consultant line, but the bookkeeper is let's just say 5,000. Because before the accountant, because we've used the bookkeeper. I don't think we need the accountant anymore for our org status. I think we're okay there.
Okay.
Is that
salaries?
okay?
Yep, salaries, Andy.
So that's flat. What Auden and I are being paid right now, and then this is, I increased this a little bit because we usually budget, well, approximately 10%. So, I mean, I could go down a little on that, but that's inconsequential, really.
And then the consultant fees.
And mind you, the salaries here remind you that you aren't paying any benefits at all. So it continues the same.
And then the next line, Andy, consultant, you recommend we keep it at 5,000?
Yeah, I mean, I use this for, we also have another, this just is in case something else comes up. And I was using it as org status to separate our legal from our day-to-day meetings. I had that separate. So it just gave us another where we could pull out for paying for the organizational status at the time of the attorney. Because the attorney has to spend a lot of time versus, so I just tried to keep it separate.
And then down to the event expenses, this is a policy question, Mariko. We normally do a December event. Does the board still support doing a December event this year?
Yeah, and I think initially my initial thoughts looking at this, I think for the spring event, in the past we would have food, and I would prefer to skip the food, but let's anticipate a December event and hoping that we can all gather in real life.
We can get our organizational status finalized, then we could actually go out and start getting sponsors again. So eventually that line should be, much lower.
Yeah.
So I would just, press upon us to get our JPA going and done.
Yeah. But that is a policy question. For the spring event, we'll talk about the agenda itself in May, but I think that was a question of, do we want to attach treats or food to people who would like to attend? And I think we can save 7,500 if we don't.
Right, or 5,000.
This is for 2022.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it. Okay. Well, then that's Chappie's decision.
I mean, we can lower it.
Andy, I actually thought it was for 2021.
Yeah, no, this is for fiscal year 2022.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that we strip that budget to the bone. Now that I realize that I'm actually going to be president at the time, I think we should leave it as it is.
So are we not having a spring event this year, a membership meeting in the spring?
we're going to talk about that next.
Okay.
We are going to have a Zoom, but we're not sending anybody any food. That is the plan.
Okay.
But we can discuss that later, but it looks like, Andy, if I'm reading this correctly, and I thank you for for highlighting that. Right now, we only have
Oh,
7,500. We have 7,500 for the spring event set aside. Is that correct?
7,500 for next spring. Yes.
No, for this spring.
For this spring, I just zeroed. No, we don't have anything for this spring. It was budgeted, but we're not going to use anything.
Got it. Because, but we will be talking about the May event as a next
Right.
item. Okay.
But there, if you guys wanted to do something, there's a little bit of money we could do something.
Okay, but going above that, the December event, we have
Us.
14,000 set aside.
Yeah, but this is what so this column here is what was budgeted, and this is what is estimated. So for the December event, we only spent $2,300.
Okay,
Last year.
for the upcoming December event.
Oh, for the upcoming, I have, this is what we have for the upcoming.
Got it. Okay, got it.
And if I heard correctly, we want to zero out spring 2022.
So this one you want to zero. Okay, well, I put it back in because Chappie changed his mind.
I think we need to keep it because next year we may be able to do something in person, so.
So we're back, okay.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think keeping it makes sense.
Okay.
Bear in mind, we're gonna need to do some cutting. Okay, so if we scroll back up, let's see what we have.
Well, actually,
wait.
so Nisa, I don't think we're going to have to do a lot of cutting because we're starting out in a much better place than I thought we were when you and I spoke yesterday.
Okay,
So we just, but the problem is this red piece right here
Okay.
that I don't have any idea what number to put on it.
So Kat and Laurel and I can give at least 2 contracts that have ceilings to them. So we can do that. Those are the 2 external legal contracts that the board has, the committee has approved. Unfortunately, I don't have, let me, while we're discussing it, I can scroll and see if I have those amounts.
and Mariko, if I may, I just want to make sure we all are talking about the same numbers.
Okay.
So Andy, for expenses this coming year, it's 188,000 based on the estimates, not including the attorney fees yet. What I see at the bottom, I just want to make sure we have, it's
Yeah.
100, okay, so that's the expenses without attorney's fees. If you scroll up, the revenue without or reserves is 162.
So we're already.
Correct.
And then if
Right.
for reserves, it's 91.
Yes.
Okay, because I think part of the policy question, Mariko, at least what I was proposing is we talk about, because right now, if you put the reserves aside or expenses without the attorney's fees exceed or revenues. And so as a policy question, I think it's important for us to discuss, is there a percent of our operating budget that we want to put in reserves no matter what? Because when I hear, we do have, if we add in the reserves of 91,000, then we do have enough, even though we don't know what the attorney's fees is yet. But if we put the reserves aside and just compare revenues to expenses, it's negative.
Got it. That makes sense. And so my question to Andy and Kat is, our original bylaws did not specify how much had to be in reserves?
Yeah, it does. Our bylaws say 6 to 9 months. And if you recall that recently, because the past practice of the cities association has been that they kept accumulating reserves. And so about every 5 years, the cities association would lower dues. And the problem was when they kept doing that, what happened, they closed the office. They just held dues flat. And but that was a practice of 6 to 9 months worth of dues, and then they also held it flat, like at about $84,000. And so we increased the budget because we went from part-time to full-time. And then you wisely chose to hire an attorney and admin. That increased it, but it's still what your discussion last year was to take it from 6 to 9 months when we changed the bylaws to 3 to 6 months. And part of the reason was to go to 3 to 6 months in reserves was if the cities choose not to have the association goes away. Like if they're not going to pay, right, there's no reason to have the association. So that was kind of the thinking about it. I think yesterday I thought before I had done all the numbers, I thought that we were in a much worse position, and I was wondering if we were going to have to do like a one-time assessment maybe to pay these extra costs. But I don't see that as a problem right now if we stay within try to stay with a 6-month reserve.
Okay. And I think that's to Nisa's point, that's a great policy discussion, and that eventually will infuse in the JPA bylaws that we create. But I think it would be a good question to ask all of us, what is the pulse here of lowering that reserve to 3 to 6? So closer to 3, closer to 6, or stay at 9. And so I look to all of you for any comments.
So I have a quick question, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. What would be the purpose of lowering the reserves down?
And then Nisa, it looks like you wanted to answer that.
To help with the unexpected expenses for this year, because we're already in the negative. If we keep all the expenses we just went through, it's 188,000. Or revenue without tapping into the reserves is 162,000.
Mm-hmm.
So there's already a deficit there. Plus, we don't know what the attorney's fees are going to be.
Right. So I would say we go into the reserves.
Okay.
And then I would also add that anything that we do, we should look at it through the crucible of knowing that we don't know what our attorney's fees are going to be.
Absolutely. Okay, so
Margaret either had her hand waving or she's trying to hit Rich in the back of the head. I wasn't quite sure.
Happy.
Or both.
I was actually thinking, since we're going into the JPA, how about a percentage? Like, most of us cities do 20% or 15%, whatever, of our budget, rather than, because I don't really know right now what 3 to 6 months means, but a percentage would be much clearer to me. So we just say 20% reserves. So that'd be like 30,000. Is that?
Well,
62.
if you're talking about 6 months of reserves, then it's what, 50% of your overall operating budget?
It's 50%.
Sure.
yeah.
So really, by default, you do have a percentage, which. So this is a question of is 50% or 75 or 30?
I guess I don't really see what we need to have, so much in reserves for. And like you said, in the past, we've just given it back to the city. So I'd rather hold on to, something lower but just keep it ongoing. So 3 months then, would be 25%, I guess. So yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
And if I could ask a clarifying question.
Yes, please.
So Margaret brought up the JPA. Where are we on that?
It's on our to-do list. Andy, do you want to, actually, if we could, we are working on it. The goal is still to complete it this year, but where we are, 25, 50%, I couldn't answer. Could you answer that, Andy?
So I'm sorry, can you ask that question one more? Tell me that. Ask the question again.
I was just asking where we are in the JPA because I think Margaret brought up a very good point. Some of the things that we want to do
Right.
could be alleviate, the strain on the budget by having the sponsorship. So
Yeah, so we are hoping to get that done this year.
I understand there's been some things in the way.
Yes, we're working.
Too.
We have a subcommittee, and the subcommittee is actually there's a doodle pull out now to for the subcommittee to get together to work on the Constitution, and then I think that we'll be able to have the board look at the Constitution. I think we'll send it to all the cities, and so this is our opportunity to change the Constitution, change the bylaws. And last year the board had said that they wanted to reduce what the bylaws say. The bylaws state 6 to 9 months, and the board last year said they wanted to reduce it to 3 to 6 months of a reserve. So just.
And can I do a reality check too on the JPA? And I agree that it will change a lot of things once we have a JPA in place, but it would not impact this year's budget. I think, for us to go through the whole JPA revision and approval process, the earliest could impact anything is next year. And that would be the spring event, which I think that's why we were talking about with the spring event. Possibly we could get sponsorship next year. So for purposes of this year's budget, the JPA, it's very unlikely that we could get something in place to get the sponsorship.
No, I agree. I wasn't anticipating for this year. Because I didn't think we'd have to get the JPA done tomorrow. I don't think that's going to happen. But again, just setting the foundation to set us up for success in the future, and especially since Chappie's going to be the chair next year, I want to make sure he has a strong foundation to work on.
Well, gee, thanks, Rich. What about me?
Versus the flames and rubble that we are dealing with right now.
It's too late for you, Mariko. It's too late.
I know, I'm going to bring us back. So I'm hearing different questions. I'm hearing one, we're going to tap into reserves, bring it down to either 6 months or a percentage, which is about 50%. And so I'm going to ask someone to make a because I think that will help determine the next set of questions. So I'm going to actually ask someone to make a motion on what should our reserves be.
Mariko,
Yes.
Can I make a quick suggestion? I'm sorry. Can we hold off on making that decision? Because we really first need to figure out what the attorney's fees are to see what the deficit is, to see if we need to tap into the reserves. Because if we need to tap into the reserves because there are no other sources out there, then it may reduce it to less than 50%, and we don't want to be betting against ourselves.
Yes, that makes sense. And I'm going to actually ask Kat and Laurel for help because I claimed I was going to scroll through my emails, but does anyone remember? I do remember we put ceilings on 2 of the contracts that we just executed, but I don't remember what those ceilings are.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mayor. I actually have another meeting I need to jump to.
Oh yeah, no worries.
I'm looking it up real quick.
I don't have it.
Don't worry, Laurel. Kat?
Okay, I can answer the one question. There is a not to exceed amount on the Liebert Cassidy and Whitmore contract, and that is 3,000. And that is, I think that's a good amount because she's just basically overseeing and reviewing the investigation. But the other 2 do not have a not exceed. There's one that's pending currently where we can make some changes to it, which I had requested whether or not we want to do a not to exceed, but we have not done that. So that's something that probably needs to be discussed.
Okay.
The one thing I can say though is, and I do need to point this out. Currently, I guess last year you had 18,000 budgeted for attorney's fees. This year I see that Andy has raised it to 20,000.
That's just a.
Right.
I know it's not 20.
Right, exactly. But I'm talking about even if you are looking at just your person who is assisting you which would be me currently, that does not go very far. You're currently, my rate is $250 an hour, and that actually only allows for 6 hours a month work. And you can see how quickly it goes. I mean, this is something that we probably need to discuss. And I did talk to Shantine about it. I asked her how she was able to do it. She said, first of all, she lowered her fee way lower than she would have. And then she actually donated a lot of time to Cities Association to make it work. And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do it. So that's the only problem. I mean, it's amazing how quickly that adds up. And Andy will tell you I'm having trouble with that part of it. So trying to figure out how to work it and be good to Cities Association and still get paid. So there you go.
And I appreciate that because I think we need to understand that as we look at our budget, what our burn rate is higher. We know at least one contract, we have a 3 o'clock chair, 3 o'clock ceiling at 3 o'clock, 3,000.
3,000, yes.
But we also have that other pending that that does not. So,
right.
So just
yes, Margaret.
Just doing a quick calculation, and thank you for sharing the details. But if we were to up it to like 10 hours a week, I think it would be about 30,000 a year. So we could maybe put that in as a placeholder.
You're talking about 10 hours a month?
I'm sorry, 10 hours a month. Yes.
10 hours a month. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's still a stretch, but I mean, the reality is that I think it's great to have you at our meetings, at our board meetings. But you don't have to necessarily be at like all the subcommittee meetings that we have. I think this year's just been challenging because of the roundtable, and that's really caused all of these legal issues. So in a normal year, we don't really have that. But it would be, I really believe we should have, to be legit, we need a legal counsel at our board meetings.
Right.
Those are usually 2 to 3 hours a month, and so 10, I would think would be sufficient, but I mean, I would leave that to your discretion. You would know better than me.
I think there's a lot of issues that come up. Reviewing the agenda in the first place, coming up, there was a lot of issues. I agree. There's a lot of issues when I came on board that took a tremendous amount of time to do the research, to figure it out, to prepare presentations and all of that. There will be quite a bit of work that is needed in order to do the JPA. Mm-hmm. Some of it's already started by Shantine, but there's a lot more that has to be done. Mm-hmm. I think the placeholder of 30,000 is certainly better than the 20, but I'm not sure that's going to cut it because a lot of things come up between meetings that require legal advice.
Okay.
So that's the only thing that I wanted to point out.
And my hope is after we get the JPA, our structure together, then it will be pretty, just routine. So maybe this year we may have to add another 20,000 or so to that, but hopefully after this year we'll sort out all the issues and we can just have a routine year, no drama.
I have to tell you, I was kind of waiting to see myself, because I think you all know that, I had certain constraints on my time. And trying to see how things will level out and how things will be quote unquote normally. And I haven't quite figured that out yet. So I'm still with you and still enjoying it, and we'll see how things go. But I agree with you. I think once you have a JPA, I think it'll be a much easier time of it, including revenue portion as well.
Nisa?
Thanks, Chair. For purposes of moving us forward and based on this discussion, is it fair to estimate maybe just 50,000? Look at the holding 50,000 for attorney's fees and then see where we land. I mean, if we don't spend 50,000, that's great. It just goes back into the pot. But can we just put a line item, Andy, for 50,000? I'm very curious to see what the difference is so then we can figure out how we fund it.
Yes, let's do that. And then with that red filled in at 60,000, what other line items do we need to fill in, Andy?
I
think
said
I'll-
50, Mariko 50. Are you upping it to 60?
Oh, did I say 60? I'm sorry. 50.
Our number just keeps getting bigger.
I know. So it's 188 plus 50 roughly.
Yeah. And so how much have we dipped, assuming that we're dipping into reserves, how much have we decreased reserves to now? I think that's the $1 million question.
Down into like 40, with 41,
Yeah,
47,000.
That's still good.
Okay, so that's about
20%. It's more really what I'm actually not sure why somebody would have put in that we needed 6 to 9 months reserves before.
well,
That's always been a little baffling to me.
You know, one of the things that we should also take into consideration is that, you know, we have paid staff. And so you always want to make sure that you have adequate reserves to make sure that staff is paid in case something catastrophic happens. So I just want to just throw that out there that's.
Well, I appreciate that.
I
You like
figure,
a bad
I
debit?
need the negative.
I
It's
figured
20,000. And our salary is 124.
so Andy, do you mind putting the spreadsheet back on so we could just,
Oh, I'm sorry.
if there's any other policy questions we need to answer? So I know we highlighted the red. Are there any, so it looks like accountant, all the other expenses we discussed. So knowing that we brought down our reserves to about, did we say about 30% now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that really is, I'd like some thoughts on that, and then eventually a motion if people are comfortable with that, and if not comfortable, some areas for adjustment, so. And again, we will refine this and present this to the board, but it shouldn't deviate too much from there.
It doesn't look like a lot of refinement is needed if,
Yeah.
do you want me to scroll up, scroll down?
No, I think we kind of got the gist of it, and so I look to everyone for their comfort level, and then eventually a motion for a direction.
Well, I guess if you're looking for a response, Mariko, I'm not totally comfortable with reducing it to that level. If it's ongoing policy decision that we're making, if it's a one-off because we know that we have, you know, additional costs and expenses for that specific year, we're making a decision for that specific year, then I'm receptive. But if it's a policy decision to keep it at that level, then I have some hesitation.
Okay, and I do want to clarify that as we go, we were talking about organizational status. We will be making decisions such as what the reserve will be for the organization. So I want to make it clear, this is to carry for this year's budget. So it's not an ongoing. Larry?
And that was one of the things I was going to say is, you know, it only re-emphasizes the need to focus on finalizing the JPA and that organizational status, which would clear up conceivably some funding issues that we wouldn't be completely reliant upon the cities themselves. So I do think that, you know, I'm not, and I agree with what Chappie said. I don't think that we should, you know, push the reserves down too much. You know, part of that was to set aside in case there are unexpected expenses that we then need to respond to, and as opposed to quickly going back to the cities. I do think it is figuring out what a reasonable number is there is important, but all that is kind of under the umbrella of a new JPA. So I'm fine with that as far as this budget is concerned, and I think the changes that we've proposed are meaningful and you know, except for, you know, what maybe the final numbers look like, but we'll see that on Thursday. I think it's good from an overall policy change.
Is that a motion?
I would be happy to make that as a motion.
Okay, and
Second. I'll
okay.
second.
Larry, will you repeat it, please, one more time?
Basically, the policy changes that we have proposed here, both reducing, at least for now, the reserves, as well as kind of the general focus of increasing the legal fees for the upcoming year and other items that you have already taken note of in the what I'll call the draft version of the budget that was displayed during the meeting
And
for
we
the
have
next year's budget.
Hi, Chappie, that's your understanding as well, Chappie?
That is correct.
That this is a 1 year.
Correct.
This is a one-year budget, and conceivably, when we move to JPA, that might be changing, but it's at least for the next fiscal year.
Are there any questions about the motion? Any debate on the motion? Oh, yes, Nisa?
So I support the motion. I just have a question about the decision we made last year to make our reserves 6 to 9 months. Was that memorialized in the bylaws?
No, because the bylaws wanted to wait until the organizational status was complete, because the bylaws have to be affirmed by, I believe it's 3/4 of the members.
Perfect. So it's not documented in any
It's just
governing
documented.
document.
It's just documented in the minutes if that's where they wanted to go. So not memorialized in the bylaws.
Any other questions on the motion? Any debate on the motion? Okay, seeing none.
Chair,
Public?
Chair, can I request that the motion be restated just to make sure I'm following by Robert's rules and not paraphrasing too much to shorten it?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Larry?
So I will try to restate what I said before. We reduce so going with what was being displayed during the meeting, and I'll rely on Andy to redisplay that in the final minutes. But ultimately, the two decisions, policy decisions were made, was to increase the legal fees as discussed and to decrease the amount of reserves for the upcoming year. We made minor changes as far as equipment and other things, but from a policy standpoint, the two big items are the reserves, the decrease in reserves, at least for the next fiscal year, and an increase in legal fee estimates.
Thank you.
Yes.
Auden, before you go, I just want to make sure that everybody knows this is the motion to recommend these things to the board.
Yes. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you. Okay, if I see no hands raised, and so if I could ask the clerk to call the roll.
Yes. Jones?
Aye.
Jones, aye. Flagger?
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Syok?
Aye.
Syok, aye. Klein?
Aye.
Klein, aye. Constantine?
Aye.
Constantine, aye. And Abakoga?
Aye.
Abakoga, aye. And with 6 ayes and 0 nays, the motion carries.
Very much, and thank you, Nisa and Andy. I know it's always difficult to make these decisions, but I appreciate you bringing the policy questions back to us, as we have an unusual year that we do need to accommodate for financially.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And big thanks to Andy. She did all the work and just brought it to me for discussion.
All right.
Okay, we will now move to item 4 on the agenda. We discussed a little bit the May general membership meeting. In the agenda packet, we have 2 proposed topics for the year. One is COVID resiliency and recovery, and the other is bystander training. Both of these have been identified as priorities by our full board. And so I wanted to open it up for discussion on, does one carry more weight than the other, so that we can plan accordingly. We had also talked about food, but I think given our budgetary issues, we decided to remove food that way, especially since it's over Zoom. But Andy, can I ask you to supplement anything?
Yes, so I just want to add that this, if we could agree on some topics and give us some leeway and permission to, I'm having problems receiving feedback, or I've made requests for people to come and speak. And so while I have asked for the economists to come, I've also requested a bystander training, but I have not heard back from either. I'm getting other contact information to try to see if I can, find another door to get access. We also do have another really great recommendation. And I can't remember the name of the organization. ING. They presented to us previously. And we could get a panel discussion regarding race and equity from them, and they are local, but they work with the NAACP. ING is the Chappie. Can you help me? It's Rania works with them. Do you remember what the name of the group is?
I know the group.
They came and spoke with us a few years ago.
I know what you're talking about. I just don't remember what
I Google it really quickly. So I have a couple of things that I'm looking for, but if you could kind of grant the COVID or and then the diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion, that we will put something together. That's and if you would like to prioritize them, that would be okay too. But may have problems filling out the panel.
So thoughts on, first of all, let's open that up for thoughts. Those are the two that we're proposing. Any immediate thoughts come to mind? Yes, Nisa?
Just to clarify, are we saying it's either or?
I don't think we're saying it's either or, because we may not have a choice. I've been trying to contact these organizations to see who I can get to come and speak. If you would like to, if both of them said yes, and we feel that we only have time for one, yeah, then I would like a prioritization of which you would prefer.
And is one more timely than the other? Is, both of them are front of mind, given that we're still in a pandemic and we're still having hate crimes. So, I want to see how people are feeling. In an ideal world, is there a priority? Margaret?
I think just in terms of timeliness, the issue of race equity is really on everybody's minds, and hope was things would be dying down, but it sounds like it feels like it's getting worse. And I think it's actually would be a more interesting discussion. Like, economists are great, but they're kind of, dry at times. And I think we're all getting those. I've had economists at a bunch of our regional meetings present, so I think I have a pretty good view of what's coming. So I would rather have a more interesting, sorry, I don't mean to diss economists, but I think the race equity issue is really, it's the more timely topic.
Thank you. Steve?
Thank you. If you were talking about race and equity and bystander training as one training, that would be one thing. I've taken 2 of the bystander trainings, and I think they're excellent. I took the second one this morning. I think it's so useful. However, if you did have to prioritize, the bystander trainings that I took were not interactive, really. It was basically, we were given a lot of information. And I think part of the race and equity discussion could be the suggestion that people take that on their own time. Again, I thought it was very good, but it was not a dialogue.
That's good feedback. Andy?
I just received a message from Rania, and it's the Islamic Network Group. And so they could provide a cultural panel in partnership with the Asian Law Alliance, NAACP, et cetera, about race across racial and religious identities. Their CEO participates on the Santa Clara County Task Force on Hate Crimes. The Intercultural Speakers Bureau addresses and counters racism across racial, ethnic, and religious groups by bringing together a panel of speakers from marginalized communities experiencing bigotry in the United States to educate about how racist narratives about a people formed and framed in history and then embedded in culture institutionally and throughout implicit biases. The panel focuses on shared history and diverse breadth of experiences from the following groups: Muslim Americans, Jewish Americans, Indigenous peoples, African Americans, Latinx Americans, and Asian Americans. After opening with a discussion on the formation and dissemination of dominant narratives, each panelist speaks about how this manifested in his or her community and what we can do to counter racism. So that is also an option for us to explore, and we have an in with that group.
Larry and then Nisa.
Yeah, so they were part when we had our hate crime in Sunnyvale 2 years ago. ING was a big partner, and we had other partners, of course, in our community, but they helped set up that panel, and we're actually doing a panel, a similar unity panel next Wednesday night, Asian Law Alliance included. And I think, they definitely bring in a good range of speakers that they have available to bring in. So, between our contacts and their contacts, I'm sure that could go off fairly well without too many problems.
Lisa?
Andy, is that group ING or CAIR that you were just describing?
ING.
Okay.
And what do you have?
Go ahead, Andy.
What is the group that you're talking about?
CAIR, and I saw a bystander training presented by that group as well. But it's very similar to what Steve said. It's very good, but it's something that I think I wouldn't want to have as our main spring event. It's something that I think we could recommend to our members or even have at one of our board meetings as a 15 to 30 minute presentation, but not as the main spring event.
Yeah.
Sure. Steve, did you have your hand up?
I did, and Nisha's kind of said what I was going to say. The only concern I have about all the groups that Andy read off is that's a lot of presentation. And so to have a dialogue after all those presentations, I think it's just a question of how much time is there. So I think it is an either or certainly, and then with that main topic, it's still a lot to go through and have participation.
Yeah. And one of the things I would like to throw out there, with the May general meeting, we try to have as more of our elected officials participate. And I wanted to throw out the idea of using breakout rooms, because I think with a lot of these discussion issues, having smaller groups to talk amongst themselves, and maybe we do ask a panel so that there's someone in the breakout room themselves that can kind of lead it. So instead of having a large general meeting, we have smaller, and there's that opportunity for elected officials to talk with one another. Okay, I see nodding heads. I hear conversation more towards the race and equity piece versus, so I'm going to throw out, do I hear then that if we can get The Economist, maybe The Economist is for April, but we should move towards a May General Assembly meeting that includes more of the race and equity issues. So.
And I'm supportive of that. I just want to have it clarified. What are the outcomes? What do we want to accomplish from the race and equity forum?
I think for me, it's more conversation. As Margaret said, it doesn't seem to be, it's not going away. It feels like it's getting worse. So, and I know Chappie, Nisa, and Rich, the three of you were also created a subcommittee last year. So, I hope this doesn't in any way conflict with the work that you are doing, but frankly, I feel helpless. And so I'm looking for any ways we can, as a community, try to help one another. But again, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. And so that's why we wanted to offer two options to all of you.
Right. And I'm totally, again, supportive. And I think those conversations need to be had. Sometimes I wonder, though, if we're just having these conversations with ourselves and we're preaching to the choir, and how do we get that dialogue and conversation, or how do we get the tools to take that conversation and dialogue to the people who are actually offending. So I know that's a much deeper discussion that we can have at a later date, but I just want to throw that out there right now in terms of when we plan these events, in the back of our minds, we should at least think of what are our goals or objectives and what we want to get out of it. So
No,
that's
so
what I'm saying.
true. That's so true. I'm going to go to Margaret and then to Steve.
I think part of it, even within our group, there's still need for education, as I felt that way when we had the discussion at our last board meeting about the resolution, as well as I read, I think most of us read in the paper the other day what happened in Santa Clara. And so in a way, I do feel like we are, most, I think in general, or there might be even an assumption that we all understand what this means, but clearly the actions aren't connecting. And so, us as electeds, we probably really need to be on the same page first, I would say. And so this was, to me, an opportunity to hopefully have those frank discussions. And yeah, just educate ourselves better. Number one. Number two is maybe if we could incorporate into the discussion, what we can do as cities, or what we are doing as cities, sharing of what we are doing to address these issues, and that would be helpful to just get some best practices.
Steve?
Well, I was going to say a little bit of what Tappy said and a little bit of what Margaret said. I think there should be more than a discussion. There should be some expectation or outcome. And it's not that everybody has to fall in line. I don't think everybody would fall in line, but I think for people that are looking for next steps and want to sort of try to dash their sense of hopelessness, if there can be, take some of these courses that we're talking about. They're enlightening. What kind of actions can cities take? Introductions of GARE kinds of programs to educate at least elected officials and have that permeate boards and commissions and all that. I think those are the kinds of action steps that would make me feel like something is coming of this and it's not, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, and maybe we can organize it so that whether it's through the breakout rooms, there's specific issues that people can kind of volunteer to join into. That's a possibility. We can certainly create a program that feels a little bit more robust. Nisa?
Agree with everything that's been said. And also, to have it feel a little different from our monthly board meetings, I think is also important. So people are excited and want to attend. And I know Andy is going to take direction from us on the broad scope and then try to find speakers or panelists. But I think that could also be a big draw. The right panelist, and it's Zoom, so it's easier now to get people from all over the world to speak at events. Not that I'm telling you to go international, Andy, but I just think part of it too is the format, the content, but also who the speakers are, to attract our members feel like, oh, I want to go to this. And when they leave, they're like, oh, good, I learned something I can now implement in my city. Like that to me is what we should be aiming for.
I like that. Let's go big. You think President Biden can join us?
We can ask.
We can ask.
No, let's go bigger. Let's get Kamala.
That's it. Yeah.
Mariko, we were on a call with Colin Powell. We could go ask Colin Powell.
I know Auden, our clerk, has a hard stop, and so would you?
It's okay.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 So I'm hearing that we are moving towards race and equity, possibly breakout rooms with specific action items at the end, and going big so that we look at really drawing more of our elected officials to attend. Okay. Could I have a motion on that?
So moved.
Okay. Motion by Rich.
Second.
Lisa, and then Auden. Was the motion clear?
I'm gonna have to ask for it to be restated.
Go for it, Rich.
I was just moving what you said. Nice try.
Okay.
Okay, so I think, so just so that we're clear, we are going, our May General Assembly, the topic will be on race and equity. And with specific, with leeway to Andy to look at speakers that will draw elected officials and provide a format that is a little different from our regular board meetings. Okay, and if you wouldn't mind just calling the roll.
Sorry. Okay, here we go. I'll start with Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine, aye. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, aye. Syock.
Aye.
Syock, aye. Flagger.
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Klein.
Aye.
Klein, aye. Abakoga.
Aye.
Abakoga, aye. And the motion carries with 6 ayes.
Okay, now we move to item 5 on the agenda, which is our Board of Directors meeting. We do have a proposed agenda in your packet. Obviously, we just discussed bystander training, so that is the only one that we would omit. But given what's on the agenda, is there a motion? Or is there a question? Let's start with questions. Are there questions on the proposed agenda?
I have a question.
Yes.
I added Santa Clara, Santa Cruz roundtable update because at the January meeting, you asked for that question to come back in 3 months. I wasn't sure if that was still the case since I don't know if we need to have that on because of, I think that I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads know that that should not be on the agenda.
I'm going to ask both Chappie and Larry as our ad hoc representatives. What are your thoughts?
I don't believe it should be on the agenda. We paused everything, paused all activity. So the clock in my mind is stopped until we either resume activities or go in a different direction.
Great.
And I agree. It's to a large degree, it's been exactly that. We stop the clock and to say, okay, what's the update? The update is we stop the clock. So it's not worth an agenda update.
Great. And then I also want to let you know that Amon Thomas has confirmed.
And Margaret, I saw your hand raised.
I thought I read somewhere, is the roundtable meeting, like, did we talk, there's something about hiring legal counsel for them? Is that, I don't know if I missed that when I came.
Actually, yes. And Kat, are we allowed to talk about this?
No, this is not agendized. I mean, you did just hire a legal counsel. That was on the consent. So that's been done.
And then that's for the roundtable.
That is for the roundtable, right?
For their next meeting, is that?
That'll be for the next meeting, yes.
Their board meeting, their roundtable meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so they will be meeting then. So the clock really isn't stopped if they're meeting.
So I'm going to ask Kat, are we allowed to talk about this?
No, I think that if you're going to talk about what the next steps are for the roundtable, it needs to be agendized. And when the next meetings are and how that's going to work, it all needs to be agendized. So I'm going to ask you to not speak about that right now.
Okay, so what I'll do is we won't talk about this. I know that on our consent, we have something passed. Larry and Chappie will continue their work on ad hoc, and then maybe I bring this back for agenda for our exec committee next meeting. Other questions on the proposed agenda for next week? Go. Seeing none, could I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Nisa. Can I have a second?
Second.
And that's from Rich. And again, the motion is to approve the proposed agenda in there without the bystander training and without the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz roundtable. Okay, Auden, do you mind calling? Oh, real
Awesome.
quick, I'm going to ask if anyone in our attendees list would like to speak. I don't see any hands raised. I'm going to close public comment and I'm going to ask Auden to call the roll.
Okay, Klein,
Yes.
Klein, I, Jones,
Aye.
Jones, I, Sayak,
Aye.
Sayak, I, Constantine,
Aye.
Constantine, I, Abakoga,
I
Abakoga, I, Flagger,
Yes.
Flagger, I, and the motion carries with 6 ayes.
Very much. Public comment. Again, I look to our attendees to see if anyone would like to speak to us. I see no hands raised, so I'm going to close public comment. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, especially if you're just watching us on our YouTube. And so I know Town Manager Provetti had to step away, but I turn to Andy for an executive director update.
I don't really have anything that the organizational status. We're going to be meeting to be working on that. And then also we'll be working on the May general membership meeting. So that is that for now.
Okay, and since there is no further business on the agenda, I'm going to adjourn our meeting at 4:36. Wish everyone a happy Good Friday and a happy Easter for those that are practicing. Thank you
All
all.
right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good
See
weekend.
some of you tomorrow.
Bye.